Sammy, thanks. News tonight, a historic first on the nation's high court. Today, Ketanji Brown Jackson was sworn in as the first black female justice and the first former public defender to serve on the nation's highest court.
Bree Jackson is in Washington with more.
Two oaths of office to uphold judicial and constitutional duties, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson made history.
I, Ketanji Brown Jackson, do solemnly swear.
A glass ceiling shattered. With her family watching and her husband holding the Bible for the swearing in, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson becomes the first black female on the Supreme Court.
I'm pleased to welcome Justice Jackson to the court and to our common calling.
Jackson once served as a clerk for Justice Stephen Breyer. He's officially stepped down after serving nearly 3 decades on the high court. His final term included dissenting on controversial decisions to expand gun rights and overturn Roe v. Wade. A ruling that sparked protests nationwide and criticism from President Biden overseas, now saying he supports eliminating the filibuster to codify abortion rights.
We've been a leader in the world in terms of personal rights and privacy rights, and it is a mistake, in my view, for the Supreme Court to do what it did.
The Supreme Court delivering another blow to the Biden administration Thursday, ruling to curb the EPA's authority to limit greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants.
It's a loss of the federal government's ability to regulate climate change.
Justice is also handing the Biden administration and Democrats a victory by shutting down a Trump-era program designed to restrict immigration at the southern border.
A decision on the Remain in Mexico program, unexpected, but we will take it.
Justice Jackson taking on an historic role on the high court at a divisive time. This is the first time that 4 women will serve together on the 9-member bench. A formal investiture ceremony for Justice Jackson is expected in the fall, but today's swearing in allows her to get to work on the high court immediately. In Washington, I'm Bree Jackson for News 11. April, Adonis, back to you.